Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to another episode of the EON Podcast. We have the honor and privilege of hosting one of the largest, should we call you a media magnet in the Arab world, Wadah Khanfar. MashaAllah, you all know him. For those who aren't aware, he was the DG of Al-Jazeera News, and under his patronage, Alhamdulillah, Al-Jazeera has grown to what it is right now, with Al-Jazeera documentaries, English, mobile, online websites, and the like. Sheikh, the legacy of Al-Jazeera is quite obvious to the Muslim world and the global South in general. You've had a long journey, mashallah, from the Iraq War to the Arab Spring, and now how do you see your baby? Yani, how do you see Al-Jazeera performing when it comes to the genocide in Gaza? Walk us through your journey, Sheikh. And welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thanks for hosting me. Al-Jazeera, of course, as usual, when it comes to issues related to matters of values, always takes the right side of history. So today, Al-Jazeera is really doing a great job introducing to the world in a very professional way the current reality, which a lot of Western media is trying actually to evade and sometimes even to fabricate in certain areas. Unfortunately, we are going through one of the worst moments in the history of media, legacy media. Al Jazeera stands in that as a unique institution which continues to speak truth to power. This is what Al Jazeera has been and what Al Jazeera is today.
Sheikh, now it's really fascinating that you mentioned legacy media, and we're in the age of misinformation and disinformation where new media is being challenged by old media and old media is being challenged by new media. Why do you suggest that Al Jazeera is sort of in the middle of that? It's neither new media nor is it old media. And why are you so confident that Al Jazeera stands on the right side of history?
First, Al Jazeera actually has been able always to reintroduce itself in the new shape and technology and evolution that media is going through. So the Al Jazeera is not today a screen only, a TV screen. Al Jazeera, as you know, is a great institution with various outlets, especially social media outlets and various podcasts and major content creation distributed through multi-platforms. So this is what Al Jazeera has been. Al Jazeera is always capable of evading the trap of being frozen in history in the past. The second, why Al Jazeera is standing as a unique institution at this moment in time, because the Al Jazeera has been always very much committed to the collective wisdom and conscience of the public and the audience. It has never betrayed the people for the sake of centers of power. Most of legacy media is owned by corporations, and corporations, as you know, have their own interests with governments and so on, and therefore they try their best not to go far beyond what governments and corporations' policies are. And this is when they start betraying the cause of journalism. It's supposed to be based on truth and based as well on bias towards the human values, the collective human values that we journalists should abide by. But unfortunately, the current exercise which media is going through in covering Gaza, for example, is another evidence that legacy media has gone astray, very far from what the forefathers of this profession have institutionalized decades ago.
Right, Sheikh, the difference that you identified between legacy media and maybe what Al Jazeera is, a new kind of media, which is not, as you said, stuck in the past, is the corporate interests, and that how those corporate interests end up being tied up with governments and interest groups. Why is Al Jazeera so uniquely protected from this? Because we all know the accusations with regards to Qatar, with regards to the bias. You faced it in Iraq. You know, the American military even attacked your positions in your offices. Some of your colleagues were martyred. Why is Al Jazeera so uniquely protected from corporate or state interests or pressure? Because this is a big claim.
Yes, I know. Al Jazeera actually, as an institution, yes, it is located in Qatar, and the budget of Al Jazeera comes from the state of Qatar. But Al Jazeera was able during the last more than 25 years to introduce to the world a unique character. Al Jazeera has become on its own an institution with tradition and expectations of the public towards Al Jazeera have been taken seriously by Al Jazeera itself. So Al Jazeera is protected by the audience, protected by its own tradition, by its own stance on previous coverage. It has stood the same in the which I describe it in the right trend of history, when it covered the Afghan war, when it covered the Iraqi war, when it covered the Arab Spring, when it covered the Palestinian issue and many other causes. Some of these were actually in direct confrontation with the media, the Western media direction and coverage. This is why the American administrations were always annoyed by Al Jazeera, and sometimes they were even violent in attacking Al Jazeera bureaus, as they did in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And they demanded, and their demands always of tuning down Al Jazeera voice is well documented across administrations, American administrations and European administrations as well. So the point which I would like to say here, that Al Jazeera is a great example of an institution that was able to build its own legacy, its own tradition, and to continue to be faithful to it, even if that legacy and the tradition is not in total sync with the government that sponsors and finances Al Jazeera.
So you're saying, basically, if I had to break down your argument for the audience, is that because Al Jazeera has created a distinct character for itself, which is its tradition or its legacy, the audience then expects Al Jazeera to follow through with that stance and to be principally consistent when it comes to different conflicts or different issues to be covered internationally, within the Arab world, outside the Arab world, regardless. So the distinguishment here would be that Al Jazeera has set out a separate standard for itself, even though it is hosted out of Qatar. And people would push back on that, Sheikh, and they would argue a lot of different kinds of conspiracies, but I'll take your answer at face value. Now, you spoke about the Iraq War a little. You were there on ground covering the Iraq War. How did you handle the pressure coming in from the Americans, whether it was violence, threats of violence, or actual violence? What was the methodology under which Al Jazeera operated in Iraq under your guidance?
So when we were in Iraq, of course, as you know, the media landscape at that time, Al Jazeera was the most important in the Middle East, because we existed almost in every town and in every city in Iraq, because our network of correspondence was very wide. We had more than 102 people reporting from various locations across the country. And therefore, the possibility of reaching out to events and to the news was maximum in Al Jazeera, beside many other institutions that decided to lower their presence because of the security threats that everyone had. When the people of Iraq started to resist the occupation, Al Jazeera was the first to broadcast the news of the resistance. That did anger the Americans very much, and they ordered restrictions on Al Jazeera staff and Al Jazeera journalists' movement inside the country. And I remember that the American army was under instructions to put obstacles in front of Al Jazeera teams. Some of Al Jazeera as well staff were arrested, and some of them were put in the most infamous prison, Abu Ghraib, at that time. So a lot of complications were put in front of our eyes during that period. But what was actually unique about Al Jazeera, that it is organically loved and appreciated and protected by the people. So Al Jazeera is the first institution, the first choice for anyone who would like to give news and provide the news. And you should remember that by then, we did not have the same explosion of social media that we have today. So we were still in a phase of a transition between the traditional media institutions and early rise of what used to call the new media at that time. So we did not have the internet accessibility everywhere in Iraq. So our correspondents were basically the organic staff that was reporting from their towns and their villages and their cities, and they became suddenly the voice of the marginalized in Iraq and the voice for the voiceless in Iraq, while other main institutions preferred to be in safety in Baghdad itself, in the capital, or within, attached and embedded within the American-led coalition in Iraq. So this is what always Al Jazeera takes the side of the people. And as I used to say, for example, during the war in Iraq, the American media used to give us the news of how a missile is fired from an American ship or an American warplane. Al Jazeera used to tell the world where did that missile land and the impact of that missile on the humans and the people and the societies that are affected by this war.
Right. So your argument is that Al Jazeera is the people's voice, and and that is what keeps it in check, and that is what motivated it to operate in Iraq the way that it did, under all that American pressure. And do you think that the Iraq war were sort of the genetic roots of the way Al Jazeera is, in that is where the tradition was set, like you mentioned, which is carried through now?
I think it started even before that, because you should remember Al Jazeera was basically launched on the 1st of November 1996. So before that, we have 1998 war, also in Iraq. Then we had Afghanistan War, 2001, and then 2003 Iraq War. So during these three major, coverages, Al Jazeera started to build. You should remember when Al Jazeera started, actually did take from BBC at that time a lot. BBC Arabic. It was closed down, and then Al Jazeera staff, BBC staff moved to the newly launched Al Jazeera, and this is how Al Jazeera started. And the code of conduct and the code of ethics that Al Jazeera adopted was not very far from what the BBC at that time was actually practicing, and we were happy and satisfied with that until these wars happened. And we saw the double standards of coverage and the fact that the Western media is really not able to grasp or not capable of being objective when it comes to issues related to the Islamic world and issues related to the Arab world. And this is when Al Jazeera school of thought started to be born. It was born from within the Western media, but later on it grew naturally and organically within Muslim and Arab societies and the global South, later on with the English channel, of course. And this is how Al Jazeera became a school on its own, adopting professional standards taken from the universal values of journalism, but at the same time, the fact that it is embedded with societies, not governments, gave it an edge and introduced it as a voice for the marginalized and the voiceless.
Right. And since you mentioned the Afghan war, and your time in India as well is particularly famous, and your coverage of the Afghan war, what was that time like considerably? How was it different from the Iraq war, and how was it different covering the Afghanistan war compared to the Iraq war?
So, of course, when we were in India, I was in India initially, then I did make some coverage from Srinagar in Kashmir. Then after that, when a first flight landed in Kabul, the United Nations at that time started to fly, I flew on that flight and landed in Kabul, and we started the coverage from Kabul after the American occupation of Kabul. In my opinion, this period was a period of a transition in media internationally. Why? Because this is when new technology started to arrive. The live reporting became much more affordable. Before that, it was mostly packaging. So you package a story, you send it, and then it is reported on the news later on. But when the fact that they introduced to us the concept of video phone, I remember the first thing we used to do, and the Thuraya phone, which was linked directly to satellites, video phone as well were linked to satellites, we were able to report directly, live. Yes, the quality was not great, but it did introduce to us a new opportunity of live reporting. So live reporting started, and with live reporting, new methodology started to emerge in media. And this methodology is much more attached to reality, to now, to the moment, to the current issue, which brought great opportunity of introducing events as they happen, but also introduced as well another challenge, which is to contextualize the news, to make it deeper than what it looks on the screen, and that of course comes with reports and packages. Afghanistan for me was a great experience. It is actually my first major coverage of a war in 2001. And I learned a lot from it. And my colleagues of Al-Jazeera who were before me there, and then their office was bombed by the American jets, and they had to evacuate the office and to leave Afghanistan. And one of them was arrested and sent to Guantanamo, and he spent few years in Guantanamo, actually, Sami Al-Hajj at that time. I think my team and myself took over from that coverage, and we started introducing the live reporting and, of course, the packaged reporting by the end of the day, plus interviews. That is also important. Values of interviews in certain circumstances like that, with various backgrounds, people who belong to various tribal, cultural, religious backgrounds, introduce the diversity that Afghanistan was about. And that was, again, a direct confrontation with the Western narrative, which try always to simplify, to reduce, and to unify a concept of a nation, rather than to go deep into the various variations of the societal and ethnic and religious diversity in a nation.
So, Sheikh, you mentioned yourself that it was a learning experience for you covering a war on ground, and that taught you the basics of journalism. And we've spoken a lot about journalism up till now, how the game was changed with live reporting and with the video phone and the satellite phone. But what about the politics, Sheikh? How did your opinions about empire, about the West develop, seeing firsthand the kind of savagery that was being committed in Afghanistan? And how did you see the role of Muslim nations like Pakistan participating with America in that conflict? And how did you see the politics? How was your politics formed around that?
I have never, during that coverage and before it and after it, lost the belief that this occupation of Afghanistan is a great mistake and is going to fail. Yes, we did see a quick takeover from the Northern Alliance at that time and the American forces of Kabul, and the quick defeat of Taliban and their retreat to Kandahar and to Kunduz and so on. But I've never, ever doubted the fact that this is temporary. The same thing happened in Iraq. Saddam Hussein was taken out from government in 23 days, but eventually I never lost the faith that this country is not going to continue to be occupied and people are going to resist. Resistance in our Islamic world is a direct result of occupation, because our nations have huge depth in history. We have a concept of dignity. We have a concept of realization of who we are, what we stand for. Generation after another, people inherit these values. So nations with history cannot be understood by nations that history is a burden for them. And I think the Americans do not have depth in understanding nations that have depth in history. And this is why always they are superficial in understanding the game of war. They are very much enthusiastic to end the war in a few days and to announce mission accomplished and the great victory and to celebrate, while our nations on long run, because they know that they have that kind of culture and identity, they will resist and they will rise up to the challenge, and then they will attack back when the Americans are actually incapable of protecting themselves in the long run. This is what happened in Afghanistan. So after 20 years, they have been defeated. Unfortunately, the fact that our Muslim countries stand with the occupier against the occupation is an unfortunate situation. We saw it in Pakistan, we saw it in Iraq, and unfortunately today we see some countries, Arab countries, standing as well, providing the Israelis with logistics and giving the Israelis the support that they need in order to defeat the Palestinians and to commit a genocide in Gaza. So that is because the Americans are an empire who is trying always to conquer and to accumulate wealth and power. The Muslim world is an ummah, but unfortunately, the current nation state has departed from the concept of ummah, the collectiveness, into the concept of the unitary action and the survival of the state and the regime in the state. And most of the time, the regime of the state rather than the state itself. And this is why they don't mind being collaborators with international forces, even if it is against their brothers or against their national interest or even against, part of their population. This is very sad, and this is a result of 100 years of humiliation and disintegration that our ummah has gone through.
Yeah, I mean, that's you've diagnosed the problem very appropriately, I think. And considering that for the audience that you are yourself a Palestinian and a refugee technically, what is your reading of the Arab world right now with the situation in Gaza? You've mentioned the regimes, you've mentioned the cooperative neighbors with Israel. What has been the response from the Arab world, and what is the exact pulse of the Arab youth right now?
There is no doubt that this is the biggest ever moment of anger, frustration, and deep sense of helplessness that the Arab street is feeling. No doubt about this. We have gone through a lot of wars in this region. But the fact that we watch for more than 1 year now a genocide on the screen, and we are not capable of doing anything to end the suffering of our brothers and sisters in Gaza is a great humiliation to our ummah, the ummah of the 2 billion Muslims. Arab world is helpless because the nations are controlled by regimes who have their own interest of survival, and they prevent any kind of real support that could be given to the Palestinians, even on issues related to humanitarian aid and so on, unfortunately. So the price of letting down our people in Palestine is going to affect every Arab country in the next few years. Why? Because there is a huge energy generated, and this energy is turning slowly but consistently into anger. And I know from this that people are not going to accept this. With time, it will explode in a form of protests, revolutions, and a lot of Arab regimes might pay a heavy price for the fact that they were incapable, or sometimes actually even trying to support the Israelis indirectly and sometimes even directly. And that was really something that no one in the Arab world from the people would like to see, but they have seen it and they are sure about it. And there is nothing to be hidden about this kind of collaboration.
You mentioned that in an interview I was listening to, and you said that Israel has lost a total strategic war. And right here, you also did a sort of analysis that the brunt of the war is not just on the Palestinians, but also on the Arab regimes. And that there is a big threat with a sort of an Arab Spring Part 2 or some kind of revolutionary protests or marches against the Arab regimes. If we had to do an analysis of winners and losers in this conflict, who would you put in which list? So the Arab regimes are one of the losers, you think? Israel is one of the losers?
No doubt. You see, okay, let me put it like this. always people see, and this is one of the shortcomings of immediacy, the culture of monitoring news as it happens and deciding and evaluating and forecasting based on the moment rather than based on a trend of history. The trend of history in this region is much more important because we know that our nations do have their own trajectory of action. So this region, the Middle East, is always a region of transition, always a region of movement. It does not just still stand for a long time in history. The nations of this region have gone through many empires in history. They adapted to many transformations. But the most consistent factor, the presence of the people in this region and the presence of their diversity. We are a mosaic of cultures, of religions, of ethnicities, of madhabs, of everything else. Now, Israel has never introduced itself as part of the Middle East. Israel, from the moment of its inception, introduced itself as an alien entity in an ancient body. And this body, yes, you could, of course, if you are equipped with huge power, as the Israelis were, because supported first by the British Empire, then by the Americans, you could, if you are supported by these kind of two empires, you could win wars. Tactically, and in short period, you can win wars because of your, huge power. But on long run, you are not part of the region. Strategically, when you invoke such a confrontation with people, you are not only fighting the people of Gaza or the resistance in Gaza, you are now fighting the strategic depth of the people in Gaza and Palestine, which is the Arabs and the Muslims across the world. And the way that you are doing it is so obvious that it is not only against the Gazans, but even against the culture that Gaza stood for the religion of people. It's now slowly and not slowly, actually, very clearly, the generals and the ministers and the statements coming from Netanyahu and his government and a lot of spokespeople in Israel is becoming much more religious than any moment in time. And they invoke certain kind of statements which looks at humans as like animals and justify the killing and justify the rape, which has never happened anywhere else in the world. So the situation is quickly turning into a total defeat, strategic defeat for Israel, because it is day after another emphasizing on the fact that it is an alien entity. And alien entities can never survive in a situation like this, which we are talking about, in a Middle East of culture and civilization and diversity and consistently growing entity. The Crusaders spent in Palestine 200 years, by the way. And the Crusaders were very much equipped with military power and equipped with also our weakness. At that time, it means the division in the Islamic world. But they were defeated and they were kicked out from that land because they were aliens in that land and they could never become part of it. Israel is not capable of its psychology, collective psychology, its a strategic way of thinking about itself, its overreach, arrogance, suicide that it is committing. It cannot be a natural entity that could survive in a region of diversity like ours.
Right. So in the overall analysis in the final analysis, as it were, of winners and losers, Israel, considering that it's a foreign entity, like a South African apartheid state, you have the whites in South Africa, they never really fit into the culture. Even they might have made better attempts to fit in. Israel is obviously much more openly alien to the Middle East in its culture and its practices, in its lack of diversity and so on. And as you said, as the war ramps up, the rhetoric is becoming more religious and civilizational, which then in turn makes it very obvious for 2 billion Muslims that this is a civilizational war. And then it engages not just the sentiments of the people of Gaza or Palestine, but of 2 billion Muslims, regardless of whether or not they're able to do something about it. But the simple fact that it does on a long-term strategic level, they're not going to survive. What about the Arab regimes? They are also sort of satellite states of a post-colonial reality. they've never been faced with such a dire challenge. Maybe Saddam's Iraq was a big threat, but after that, this has been the biggest threat since the Arab Spring. Do you think there's a real sentiment in the Arab youth? Do they have the galvanization, or will Mohammed bin Salman's modernization of Saudi Arabia, for example, would that win out the youth with economic opportunity, access to the Western entertainment and education and so on? Is that going to win out, or do we see a demand for more freedoms and democratization in the Arab world? Is there a real demand in the Arab street?
So let me put it like this. The Arab regimes at this moment in time are the weakest since the formation of the current Arab states. Some of them from the early 1920s, and some of them in the 50s and 60s. But this moment in time is the weakest. Why? Because they are incapable of addressing the basic interest of their population, the national security of their countries, and they are not capable as well of providing goods and services for their countries. Most of these countries right now are on the edge of economic crisis, plus a deep humiliation created by the current war in Gaza. And so their incapability of serving the pride of the nation and serving the nation in various ways is actually a major threat for the survival of a lot of Arab regimes at this moment in time. Now, coming to the youth, the Arab Spring was a great opportunity, but unfortunately that opportunity was not allowed to survive. Why? The Arab Spring was initially started by a group of educated youth, non-ideological and non-sectarian, and not partisan, actually. It was an elite emerging in the Arab world. But this elite today are in jail or in diaspora, in exile, and they cannot do much. So who is left in the Arab world? A lot of powers, parties, movements are destroyed. They lost because the states are fighting everyone. They are not allowing anyone to operate based on democracy, based on anything else. Any voice called democratic voice in the Arab world is either in jail or is in exile. So when you close the door of hope for the youth, and when you are not providing these youth with the satisfaction that they are wishing to see from their regimes, especially on the issues of national pride and the issues of standing for the oppressed, as we see right now regarding Gaza, then you are in front of a very dangerous recipe that could create chaos, not even revolution or change. It could create some, dangerous formations which might lead to a lot of chaotic situations that are beyond control. So why am I saying this? Is it enough for us to enforce some perspective in some rich countries of technology and making people much more attached to development models? I don't think so. You should remember that Tunisia was one of the most developed countries in the Arab world when the Arab Spring in 2019, 2011 started in Tunisia. So people automatically put their dignity and their demand for freedom and their demand for democracy and their demand as well to protect their national security. They put it always above the bread and the butter. And I do think that in the future, this will prevail, even if today some people might prefer to be connected to technological models and artificial intelligence models and whatever it is. But believe me, that technology will be one day used for demanding more freedom and more democracy. So the more you educate people as well, the more they are going to be demanding to have a say. The more you ignore them, the more they will get angry, and that might lead to chaos. So we are in front of, in my opinion, we are in front of a future which will carry change regardless of whatever track the Arab state is taking, if it is not leading to democracy and freedom.
So one of the unfortunate failures of the Arab Spring was that it ended in violence, and it was an appeal to power as opposed to any ideological end to that whole movement. And now, with the lack of slogans and leadership, like you've said, you think that there will be a more violent and less peaceful, style revolution this time around. Wouldn't you say that that energy was already spent in the form of ISIS? That energy that had developed in the Arab youth, wasn't that spent in a a perversion of that Arab Spring in the form of a violent ISIS and a Daesh?
I know it was in a way, but it was done in a way that did not represent this mainstream, which I'm talking about. So it did represent very angry, very violent, extreme version. And definitely it is basically one of the symptoms of the current reality that the Arab world is going through, no doubt about it. But with what Daesh is doing. And they did not see the method that Daesh is practicing as a reflection of their hope of change. Even those who were angry with their regimes, even those who have been in jail, but you should remember also that they have their own views and ideas about what system, what society, what regime they are going to live in. And I don't think they prefer that kind of model that Daesh introduced. So are we in front of a new Daesh or a new Al-Qaeda or a new Arab Spring? Maybe we are in front of something new, not necessarily one of these, because events have changed, time has changed, tools are changing quickly. Technology now is much more present in everyone's pocket, plus artificial intelligence, which has just arrived. So you should remember that the Arab Spring, for example, was a result of social networking. It was the Facebook revolution. Now we went far beyond that Facebook revolution. Maybe the new generation will have its own way of protesting and introducing new concepts. What we are advocating now, I am leading an institution called the Sharq Forum, and we have just finished our 8th international conference, where about 1,500 youth from across the region attended. We are advocating the concept of networking amongst people who are seeking to change their social and political and cultural reality, and to gather the people in this region around values. And these values should evade the concept of total collapse and chaos that will not serve anyone, actually, but the divisions and civil wars that have been raging, at least right now, in 5 Arab countries, which is very sad. So it's not convenient to us to just wait and see how chaos could lead to total collapse, because this is going to be another way for the West to interfere in our countries and to divide more and to create more partisan reality, which never helped us in unifying our aims and goals.
So, since we've come up to the topic of Al-Sharq, would you describe it as a counter to the WEF as a youth forum for like-minded individuals across the Muslim world or the Arab world? Would it be extended to, can you describe some of the key features of the institution? And would it be extended to Central and South Asia, because a larger population of the Muslim world and the global South is in that Central South Asia region, where you would find Pakistan, Afghanistan, the Stans basically, and India and Bangladesh?
Yes, correct. So this is a great question, actually. The World Economic Forum and their youth institutions were based on major concept of elite and concept of power and concept of the rich and famous. The Sharq Forum is based on talents, based on people who are active, young people who are active in their societies, regardless of their major status in wealth and power. So this is one. Second, a Sharq Forum emerges from within these societies. It is very organic. So people can apply to a Sharq and join a Sharq and become part of it, and there are hubs in 32 countries across the world. And that is a great example of how you put networking in operation. It is decentralized in a way, but it is centralized as far as values and aims and goals of the institutions are. And I see year after another, the quality of people, of the young generation joining is much better. And I think there is a new awakening right now happening in the Arab and Islamic world. And the youth are carrying this awakening, not the old generation, because they are much more daring, much more open-minded, and much more creative. And this is why I'm very optimistic that the next few years we will have a new elite emerging in the Arab world. And this elite, this current war in Gaza, has pushed and accelerated the process of birth of a new elite, because the old elite has proven incapable of standing for the people of Gaza. This is very important as a start. The second one is, if you think about the concept of Ummah, the concept of Ummah has been always a concept introduced by us when we are trying to sympathize with our brothers who are oppressed in this part of the world or that part of the world, as a moral and emotional concept. But as Sharq is advocating a geopolitical and a strategic definition of the concept of Ummah. So when we speak about the concept of Ummah, we don't mean this kind of moral bond or brotherhood bond amongst Muslims. We are talking about the possibility of converting that into proper integration among certain regions, especially in the Middle East and in what we call a Sharq region, where economy is a start, but later on it could extend into various aspects of people's life. Why it is difficult for us to imagine that we could form something similar to the European Union, for example? Not necessarily all Muslim countries, but some of the Muslim countries who are connected, a neighborhood, they could form something similar to the European Union. Who could have imagined in 1945 that the French and the Germans could sit together in one union and citizens could travel freely and live wherever they like? Now they are doing it. Why can't we, although we have the legacy of Ummah long before the Europeans had, why can't we imagine ourselves moving into integration and trying to establish the concept of Ummah in a new projection in practicality and reality and pragmatism? I think this is one of the most strategic questions that we're trying to advocate and try to introduce projects that could enlighten the youth about other options of existence rather than sticking to the current nation state, which failed to a large extent in most of the Muslim countries to introduce security and prosperity.
That's a very fair point. I mean, you know, the classical example you've covered of Afghanistan, the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, the Durand line, it doesn't make any sense geographically. People are married tribally on either side. Our relationship all the way up till Bukhara in Uzbekistan for a couple of thousand years, even prior to Islam, has been quite obvious, the relationship between Central and South Asia. But I want to tell you that we have a lot of young global leaders from the WEF already in place in Pakistan. So Al-Sharq might need to speed up its processes in Pakistan, because a sizable bulk of the population of the Muslim world, because we've been exporting the cream of our society into liberal Western academia for 50, 60 odd years. And our relationship with the Western world is so deep now and deeply entrenched that I'll give you an example. Just last week, the American Home Office sent a team to prepare the Punjab police on how to police minorities and marginalized groups. And it was, you know, this sort of lip service about gender and sex and these sorts of things. So we're very deeply entrenched in these things. How do we counteract this? If young people listening to you right now, you know, they're in their 20s and teens and they are young leaders in their own right, either in the humanities or the applied sciences, whatever they're doing, how do they get involved and what role can they play with Al-Sharq, for example?
So a Sharq Forum is an institution that has many departments. Of course, I'm the president of the forum itself, but a Sharq Forum is a strategic, basically, institution and think tank. But we have a network called the Sharq Youth Forum. By the way, the network is led by a Pakistani young guy who have been the most active in this network, and he was the leader of a Sharq Youth Conference that was held last week. He's brilliant, and we have many brilliant Pakistanis. Maybe not enough. Yes, I agree with you. Maybe we have to expand more in Pakistan, and I do definitely believe that Pakistan is one of the most important Islamic countries, and we do have to emphasize on our presence there. But I believe that most youth have accessibility now through internet to join a Sharq forum through our website, and also to join a Sharq circles, because a Sharq has many hubs, and every hub basically is located in certain country, and some of these also circles are dedicated to certain kind of interests or certain kind of specialties. So I definitely welcome the Pakistani youth more than any other nation, since really I do believe in the role of Pakistan. I have no doubt about it. Now, coming back to the lines that we spoke about between Afghanistan and Pakistan, the same lines we have in the Arab world, in between Iraq and Syria, between Jordan and Iraq, between Lebanon and Syria. These lines were drawn after lunch, as Churchill once described it, by ignorant bureaucratic institutions in the West who never had any, relationship with reality. And they decided conveniently to divide this region, which was for centuries connected, divide it in the way that they did. And this is one of the most important reasons for the current partition and weakness that our ummah is facing, because this is not natural, not organic, not human even. Because as you said, divided families, divided tribes, and destroyed fabrics of societies built over thousands of years now is threatened by the rise of so-called nationalism, which most of the time is only serving a territory devoid from its originality.
Right. So you see that, like, for example, for us in the Muslim world, we're very fascinated by the fact that Banu Tamim is, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Saudi. It's everywhere. For us, tribalism is a bit different. The geography of the South and Central Asia is a bit different. And you're right, these arbitrary lines, arbitrary agreements like the Sykes-Picot Agreement and so on and so forth, the Durand Line in South and Central Asia. Here on the channel, we have a joke about a South and Central Asian union called Stanistan. And we joke about it and we call it, as a meme for the young people, we call it Stanistan, which is a conglomeration of the Stan countries, at least up until Bukhara, because that's where the classical historical relationship of the Silk Route has been. You saw a competitive model brought in by China. If we talk about global accesses, like on the one hand, if the WEF is working, you have the Al-Sharq institution. Similarly, in the Western trade model, you have a counter to that, the Belt and Road Initiative. We had a lot of the groundwork for the Belt and Road Initiative in South Asia and Central Asia laid down. And in particular in Pakistan, it was called the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. These sorts of projects have been described by American journals as the biggest economic failure of the 21st century and so on and so forth. But the actual tangible effects of the Belt and Road we are experiencing right now when we live in Pakistan, a lot of the electricity that we have, a lot of the new major road networks that we have and so on. This complete disconnect between Western academe and actual on-ground situation in the Eastern world or the global South or whatever you want to call it, is this a sign, you think, of multipolarity slowly becoming a reality with China and with Russia in the Ukraine war? Do you think the potential for countries like Pakistan, who have been classically Western aligned, do you think the breaking out from the stereotype is finally possible?
So I have no doubt that we are consistently and maybe even now quickly moving into multipolarity. So the West has been declining, China has been rising, a new challenge to the Western order has been presented not only by China, but also by Russia and various countries in the South, maybe not in a massive way like what Russia did, but technically speaking, the fact that BRICS now is becoming much more larger, although it is not as solid as people could expect. But the issue is everyone is feeling the decline of the West. The decline of the West on many levels. One of them, and the most important of them, is the core. The core of the Western order for the last 300 years was the values that try to enforce internationally, liberal values that eventually evolved into something called the new liberal values in economy and in social life. Now, these new liberal values became very arrogant and they become a utility of subjugation. and utility of dominance, utilities in the hand of the empire, rather than a natural service to humanity in a universal concept of diversity. This is why the core of the Western civilization is decaying. And once the core is decaying, it's a matter of time when the body itself starts to disintegrate. So China is rising, no doubt about it. And I do believe that the rise of China is a great opportunity for Muslims in the middle powers, especially Pakistan is one of them. The middle powers now have much better opportunity to readjust their position. We should forever leave the days when we were doing whatever Washington or London or any other Western capital is dictating upon us, sometimes gently, sometimes arrogantly, sometimes violently. Right now, I think they are much more weaker than us. And I think Latin America realized that long before us. Africa even realized that long before us. Maybe we are the newcomers to the scene. Maybe until now, America is much more respected in Arab capitals and Muslim capitals, Arab regimes, I mean, and Muslim regimes, not the street, of course, than the streets of Caracas or the streets of Brasilia or the streets of South Africa. So we have just come to the scene. And I think we need to take full advantage, because you should remember, when the international order is cracking and weakened, the people in the margin have much better opportunity to relocate themselves and to readjust the balance of power regionally and internationally. And this is our moment where we need to really start making alliances with like-minded nations around us and create regional institutions that could shape the new world order rather than leaving it for China and America to shape it. So what you spoke about, the initiatives that the Chinese are doing, the New Silk Road and many other initiatives, in my opinion, are a great opportunity economically, but we need always to be aware of the fact that we need to have our own geopolitical center. We don't need to be, again, either pro-America or pro-China. We need to think differently. We need to think of Pakistan and Turkey, or as you said, the stands, or a few countries sitting together, forming a new economic integration, new powerful entity that could become a regional power that could shape the world order rather than becoming secondary or a proxy to one of the major great powers.
Like you mentioned, Sheikh, it's very unfortunate, but in Pakistan, especially right now, even though we as, me as a layperson, you as a media expert and a political strategist, you can see the global shift that's happening. But our regimes, unfortunately, still have a deep amount of respect and reverence for Western capitals, for Washington and London and so on. Right now in Pakistan, it seems like everybody is waiting with bated breath for the American elections, as if everybody is holding their breath. And your ideas that you've presented are hypothetically true, but in the practical implications right now, it seems that the world is sort of holding their breath for the American elections. So there is still that nugget of domination that America holds on to, regardless of how much rhetoric that we might have criticizing its core and the decay of values. What do you think this election is going to mean for the global South, for the Muslim world, for Pakistan, and for America even?
So, number one, let me tell you something. Our elite has let us down. Our political, intellectual elite for the last few decades, who embraced wholeheartedly modernity and Western values blindly in a way, and converted that into a total subjugation for the Western powers, is a major disaster, in my opinion. This is why we need a new elite. New elite means a new imagination. If the new elite is going just to copy-paste the current game of power and embrace it, then we will fall in the same trap of repeating ourselves. What you have been talking about, the new map, is a great exercise, even if it is not going to happen right now, even if the current regimes, impossible that they will subscribe to it. But we should think differently. Me and you, we are not people in power, but we could influence how the public is thinking. And the public should start imagining a new sphere of geopolitics, a new sphere of a strategy that could unify us and create a new power. Maybe a day will come with the new generation will take over, will have a new maps. Why the West should always provide us with maps? I'm surprised. I'm living in a region where if a think tank in Washington comes up with a new map for Iraq, saying that Iraq should be divided into 3 countries, then everyone takes it serious and start debating it. Shame on us. Can't we come up with a counter map saying that, no, we need a unity between Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Jordan, and they create a new entity that could stand for Palestine, for example. Even if that is impossible to achieve by the current governments, but at least the public should start breaking the barriers, the mental barriers that have been for 1 century created in our minds as sacred. This is not sacred. For 1,300 years, we were one ummah. Now, why should we only worship borders drawn by the Sykes and Biko in London? I mean, this is ridiculous. So this is number one. Second, coming to the American elections, can't we see how much America is going through decline and chaos and corruption of the political system? A political system that could not introduce but the most weak, actually, candidates in decades. It means to me that the current society is actually facing a major challenge, not only the system of the USS of America. So this is another example that another facet of decline of the Western regime. Look at what's happening in Europe. Most of the leaders in Europe are the weakest in generations, by the way. Most of them are marginal in their support. Most of them are actually just blindly following the Americans, especially on the issue of the war between Russia and Ukraine, on the issue of Gaza, when they try consistently to support Israel blindly and turning a blind eye on what's happening there on genocide and ethnic cleansing. So basically, we are in a front very weak leadership in the West, in America and in Europe. This is very important to notice and to read. And this is why the fascination of America and the fascination of Europe should be re-examined sincerely by people who have real thoughts about what our region should look like in the future.
This is well said, Sheikh. As a final thought, we've taken up too much of your time. This has been a nice short introduction to you, inshallah, hopefully to what is a long series of conversations with Al-Sharq and yourself, inshallah. I know you're not a pundit, and Al-Jazeera and your training, it's not punditry, but the people always ask, what is the situation in Gaza going to look like in the next month, 6 months, a year? Where is the conflict heading? As a closer, can you do a brief explanation of what you think? And again, we're not going to hold you to these predictions, but to give a brief overview for the public.
So think about a trajectory, which is safe for me and you, because sometimes to predict a month or two might be very dangerous. But I prefer always in geopolitical analysis to think about trajectories and think about the trend. The Arab world and Palestinian issue started in 1987. It was a major intifada called the Intifada of the Stones, if you remember. And it was basically using stones. Then after that, at the beginning of the millennium, we started the second Intifada, which was started using weapons. Then we started seeing rockets fired from Gaza. Then it was very primitive at the beginning, but later on it evolved into something else. And this is the war that we see now is the sixth war, and it is much more sophisticated than any other one that happened before. So the trajectory says that the resistance in the region has been growing systematically, not only in Gaza, but also around us, in Lebanon in particular, and we have also from Yemen and Iraq and so on. So Israel is losing the edge. Israel has been always feared in the region as the power that can never be defeated, and the army that can never be the army that has defeated 5 Arab countries in 6 days. This is what they used to tell us. Now, in my opinion, that myth has been destroyed. This is very important. The illusion of superiority of the Israeli power is destroyed. Second, the people of Gaza have been going through hell, basically, during the last few, more than now 1 year and 1 month. and starvation and many. None of us, including myself, predicted that people could really live that kind of time for this time under this kind of severe circumstance. But they did. Always these people are surprising us. How much they have patience, how much they have dignity, how much they could really stand for the occupier. I'm not saying that the people of Gaza should continue this kind of fight, because all of us should try to stop this genocide and to stop the killing of Gaza, because what is going in Gaza is unbelievable and should not be accepted at all. But we should remember, when the occupier is becoming so arrogant and try to suppress people, that always is turned automatically into a great reservoir of determination and resolution and resistance. And this is why, if the Israelis continue this war, because they are the people who are continuing the war, not the people of Hamas or the people of Hezbollah or the people of the Houthis, the Netanyahu government is insisting to evade any kind of initiative so far to stop the war. If that war continues, it will evolve automatically. It will include more people in the region. It might include more territories. And this is where we are moving slowly but consistently into a much bigger confrontation. On that confrontation, definitely the Israelis will lose. The Israelis do not have the capacity to survive a war with hundreds of millions of people in the region who are now getting very much angry and annoyed by the current situation, and they wish to stop this genocide, but helplessly they cannot do anything about it. So Israel is playing a very dangerous game, and as I said always, eventually this is another sign that colonial settlers cannot survive long confrontation with the indigenous people. This has happened everywhere in the world, from Vietnam to South Africa to Algeria, wherever you go. Eventually, wars could take years and decades, but eventually the people of the land will win it.
Right. Rightly so. Well put, sir. As a closing, we thank you. Would you like to say something to the Pakistani audience?
I would like to say to the Pakistani audience that I know that you have deep feelings towards Palestine and towards Gaza and towards Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, because Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa eventually is not a Palestinian owned entity or property. It is a holy site for all of us Muslims in the world. And I would like to direct your attention that while we are watching the genocide in Gaza, Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa every day has been, invaded and subjected to the most dangerous procedures that could really, destroy a lot of what we knew about the Masjid al-Aqsa. So we need to be awake and we need to be aware to stand for the people of Gaza, at least to boycott those who are supporting this war and those companies who are providing the Israelis, and also to give whatever voice we have to stop this genocide and to stand in a way where we look united as Muslims across the world in the face of injustice and oppression.
Jazakallah, Sheikh. Thank you for your time, and I hope to see you soon, inshallah.
Inshallah. Shukran jazilan. Thank you very much.
Jazakallah. Khuda Hafiz.